Thank you, Glenn. I was interested to see on the program that communication has been divided by specialty as though it's not something that's common to all disciplines. It really transcends specialty. So when I'm asked to talk about communication in general surgery, I hope that it doesn't confine itself, or my presentation here doesn't confine itself to general surgery alone. I was also interested to learn that there are quite a few nurses in the audience, which is pleasing. Perhaps we could have a little show of hands. Who's a nurse in the audience? Great, because what I'm going to do is just share a couple of personal anecdotes with you, one of which does actually relate to communication through a nurse. And what I think these anecdotes illustrate is not that someone fails to say something, not even that someone fails to listen, but rather that the listener doesn't act on the communication for some reason. And I think the common theme here is perhaps an over-recognition of authority, that we tend to acquiesce in the face of authority, and sometimes to the detriment of patient care. Now, happily, there was no sad outcome in either of these anecdotes. The outcome was good and everyone went away, everyone was discharged and happily went home. But let me just illustrate something for you. The first relates to a patient about 4 or 5 years ago that I did a total radical gastrectomy on a middle-aged woman for gastric cancer, as is usually done for gastric cancer. She was in her mid to late 40s, had multiple psychiatric issues and was on multiple psychotropic medications, extremely anxious woman. The operation just went swimmingly. It went as well as could be expected in the circumstances. Patient was packed up, went through HDU for a few hours, and the next morning I saw her on the ward. She only went to HDU for literally a few hours. I came around on the ward. Morning following her surgery, she had a nasogastric tube in. Now, nasogastric, haven't you just done a total gastrectomy? Yes, I've done a total gastrectomy, so there's no gastric in which to put the nasogastric tube, so there's no stomach. And this was obviously evident to my team, who are not fools, and they knew that there was no gastric for the nasogastric to go into. And consequently, when they came around a little later that morning, they weren't surprised when there was no gastric juice in the nasogastric tube, as you would expect. When I came around to see this woman, I came fairly early. I usually get there early enough to beat my team, probably a reflection of my insomnia. But anyway, I got there fairly early, beat my team, had a chat to her, reassured her that everything went swimmingly. And I said that we have a major challenge. You're on at least 3 drugs for which there is not an intravenous formulation. Now, you've got that tube in your nose, and I know it's kind of uncomfortable. Throughout this conversation, I should say, there was a nurse sitting beside her, and my conversation and my direction included the nurse as well as the patient. So I was going back and forth between the nurse and the patient. You have that tube sitting in your nose, I said. It's not the most pleasant of things, but and I know there's nothing coming up it, but that's there so that we can deliver your drugs. It's not actually there for the benefit of draining your stomach, because of course there is no stomach. So don't worry, in a couple of days you'll be swallowing things by mouth and that tube will be out by then. So I said to the nurse, who was sitting beside the patient, would you ensure that that nasogastric tube, which is not in the stomach but in the jejunum, remains in place, so that we can deliver the drugs for Mrs. Jones. I then went out, to the counter. In those days we had notes, Glenn. Now we don't, we have computers. I can't quite manage with the computer, but in the notes it was pretty easy. I wrote a note to the effect, please leave the nasogastric tube in place so that we can deliver the drugs. I'm like, everyone knew. Like, what more does one have to do? And duly the drugs were delivered, but between the time that I saw the patient on that day and when I next saw the patient on the following day, and I came around a bit late, I must have had a bit of a lie-in, on the second day following the operation, my team had beaten me. So the team, including the fellow and the registrar and the residents, come around between the time when I saw her on the first morning and when I saw her on the second morning, and had noted that there was nothing in the nasogastric tube, and according to sort of the rules of the unit, and my own personal rule, the tube's there to drain something. If it's not draining something, take it out. The same nurse was in the room. I don't often remember people, but it was the same identical nurse was in the room, who, having been instructed by my team to please remove the nasogastric, she duly did, despite the fact that she had a clear mandate to question that removal, and we had a clear reason to leave it in, but she acquiesced to authority and removed the nasogastric tube. That's my first little anecdote. The second, in order to protect the innocent, although the guilty party here is me, always me, but let's just say that I have two young junior doctors. We'll call them Ali and Asif, just for argument's sake. They're brothers. They look very similar. Anyone could be excused. Anyone could be excused. There's a couple of people that have recognised my aliases. Obviously, they look very similar. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago, when Ali was, let's say it was Ali, was our registrar. Absolutely fantastic. Now, this young man, he knew everything about everyone. He was right on top of it. He was right on top of it across every situation. And I wandered into the ward. I gave him a bit of a sideways glance. I said, "Come with me. We want to go and see a few patients." And this young man, acquiescing to authority, without question, leapt up and followed me around. So went past the first patient. The first patient's going well. "Oh yes, you're doing good." Felt the belly, all going good. "You can go home today." Went to the second patient. "Now update me on what's going on here." "Well, I don't know, Prof. I don't really know." Okay, so I made my own assessment. Got to the third patient, and it was only when we got to the third patient that Ali said, "Prof, I think you might have me confused with Asif." I thought, this beggars belief. Here I've done half a ward round with the younger brother, who hasn't had the temerity, because I'm the authority figure here, hasn't had the temerity to tell me that I've got the wrong doctor. I felt like a complete idiot. That's not unusual. Anyway, the point that's common, the common point to both these little experiences is that we need, in my view, and I don't know what the solution is here. I hope that maybe we can tease it out in discussion. But in my view, the common theme is that we have a problem with questioning authority. We have a problem with people standing up and just saying, "Well, this doesn't seem right." And if we did that more often, I believe that the hospital environment would be a safer place. And the thing that really shocks me about the experiences that I've just related to you is that I've always prided myself on having a relatively flat relationship with my junior colleagues. I've always thought, hey, I generally remember people's names. I don't often make that mistake. And I pride myself on encouraging people to speak up. And yet, both these times, people, despite my efforts, people were not prepared to speak up. Thank you.